Hi, everybody. Welcome back to my day 9 of my 10-day program. Today, we're going to go through some ACT tips. By covering the ACT tips, you cover the SAT tips because the ACT has the same sections as the SAT plus one more additional science section. So, let's get into it. So, ACT grammar tips. The biggest tip is to remember the 4 C's: complete, consistent, clear, and concise. Good writing should be in complete sentences. Everything should be consistent, the meaning should be clear, and the best answer, free of any errors, will be the one that is the most concise. I cannot stress that enough. If you apply the 4 C's, you'll be able to eliminate answer choices immediately when you see the test. Secondly, know what ACT grammar rules to expect. You don't need to memorize your grammar textbook to prep for the ACT, but it's a smart move to review the most common grammar rules tested on the ACT English test. You can expect to encounter grammar questions about the following topics: subject-verb agreement, pronoun agreement, adjectives and adverbs, comparison and superlatives, punctuation, and conjunctions. Let the answers help you. The answer choices are your clues to identifying what the question is really asking. Do any of the words or punctuation change? Pay attention to what changes versus what stays the same in the answers to figure out what the potential error is. Number 4, trust your ear, but double check. Your ear is pretty reliable at raising the alarm for outright errors and clunky, awkward phrasing. Always verify what your ear is telling you by checking the answer to identify the topic and confirm there's no error. If something sounds off, investigate further, but remember to be careful for errors your ear won't catch. Number 5, cross off answers that don't fix the error. To go from good to great on the English test, you can't just fix a question in your head and then find an answer that matches. Instead, after you've identified what's wrong, eliminate all the choices that do not fix that error. And number 6, don't change what isn't broken. No change is a legitimate answer choice. Don't make the mistake of assuming that all questions have an error that you just can't spot. So yeah, those are the basic grammar tips. Now let's move on to the reading. Okay, so ACT reading tip. Tip 1, read the entire passage. Always read the passage first. Reading the entire passage is crucial to understanding it and remembering the details. Too many students think they can skim the passage or read pieces of it. That's not enough to answer the questions quickly or correctly. You need to read it completely. Number 2, read the entire questions. Always read the question after reading the passage. Many students think they can save time by reading the question and then searching for the answer. It doesn't work that way. You end up spending more time doing this because you can't find the answers quickly. Number 3, don't reread passages. If you read part of a passage and don't understand what it's talking about, don't go back to reread it. Chances are you won't be able to understand it the second time and you will waste precious time doing it. Read the passage and keep moving to the next section. The questions will ask you technical things about the passage. You don't need to know that kind of detail. Tip 4, don't forget line references. You can't remember everything during a test. It's impossible. Use line references and read the surrounding context for more. There's a reason why the ACT has line references. Tip 5, use practice tests. One of the best ways to prepare for the reading section is to read through the practice test and work the questions. Make sure when you do the practice test that you time yourself. You need to get the hang of being under pressure. That's key. Number 6, don't be afraid to guess. One thing to always remember is that wrong answers don't count against you. If you don't know the answer or can't find the answer in the passage quickly, just guess and move on. There's no point wasting time when you can move on to other questions that you can answer correctly. Tip 7, practice reading. The best way to improve your reading skill is to simply practice. Get some books from the library and just read. Read a novel or a news article or a magazine. Read anything. Just practice reading. Also try to time yourself during your reading sessions and document how long it takes you to read certain length articles. Tip 8, rule out wrong answers. Sometimes the correct answer isn't always apparent, but there are clearly several wrong answers. Rule out the wrong answers and try to answer the question by a process of elimination. Tip 9, find the answer in the passage. This is a tricky tip because you don't want to spend too much time looking for answers in the passage, but it can be helpful to go back to a specific spot if you know the answer is there. If you can find the answer, you know you will be correct. Tip 10, don't stop. Don't stop reading. Don't stop to think about something else. Don't let your mind wander. Just keep reading. You need to get through the passages as fast as possible to give yourself enough time to answer the questions. So those are the ACT reading tips. Let me move on to the ACT math tips. So ACT math tips. Number 1, don't rely on a formula sheet. Unlike the SAT, the ACT does not provide a formula sheet, so you will have to memorize all the formulas you may need. At first, this may be seeming like a disadvantage, but it is not. By keeping the formulas in your head, you'll be able to access them much more quickly than if you kept flipping back and forth to a separate page. Plus, in order to retain the formulas, you'll have to keep practicing with them. By the time you get to the exam, you'll be doing so good on the practices that the problems will be so similar that you won't even break a sweat. So which formulas do you need to know? Just search up the 9 must-know ACT math formulas or like any ACT math formulas list, and they'll give you it anywhere online. So yes, that's what I would recommend. Number 2, become a graphing expert. It is not enough to simply know a list of formulas, such as the distance formula or the midpoint formula. You also need to know how to apply those formulas to graphs. Sometimes the ACT exam won't give you a list of points to plug into an equation. It will give you a graph with some points, and you'll have to use the graph to calculate the other points before you even tackle what the problem is really asking for. When you're studying, make sure to spend extra time reviewing and practicing with graphs. Concepts that seem so simple and straightforward questions can be much more complicated when you're working them in a different format. If you're going to use a calculator on the exam, make sure you know how to use its graphing capabilities. Like, do you know how to use a graph function, choose a proper window, or draw a circle on a calculator? These are important questions that you should be able to answer, and if you don't, practice them on your calculator. Similarly, make sure that you know how to correctly read data from tables. Number 3, get plenty of sleep before the exam. So, as you know, the math exam is one that keeps going very fast. So if you don't have enough sleep, your mind won't be as focused and as ready to tackle the test, and you'll slow down, and that's not good. So what I would recommend for this test is just make sure you sleep and get enough sleep. If you don't, you won't be as prepared. Number 4, manage your time wisely. With only 60 minutes for 60 questions, there's not a minute to spare on the ACT math exam, so budget your time wisely. Well, how should you budget your time? Most people may think 1 minute per question. Well, no, that's not the case. The ACT goes in increasing difficulty, well, most of the time. The questions 1 to 30 should be pretty straightforward, and it should take only a little time to do it. Do not spend a lot of time on question 1 through 30. Question 30 to 40 gets a little bit more difficult, but still, it's not impossible. Those questions, for the first 30 questions, I would recommend spending 30 seconds or less per question. From 30 to 40, I would recommend spending 30 to 45 seconds per question. From 40 to 60, I would recommend spending a minute or around a minute per those questions. With this time period, or about a minute or even more, like it's depending on the question. So with this scale, you should be able to finish on time, and you should be able to finish more accurate. You would need more time on the last questions than you do in the beginning because they start to get harder. So yes, this moves on to my 5th tip. Do the easy questions first and the hard questions last. So what I would recommend is to always shoot the sitting ducks. What this phrase means is there are very easy questions on the ACT math exam that are very straightforward and will take you seconds to do. Look for those questions. They should be, the first 30 questions are pretty easy like that. So I'll do the first 30 questions, then from 30 to 60, look for the easiest questions first and just tackle them. Answer them as quick as possible, get those done, and then come back. Don't waste your time on going in order, doing every single question, because some will be much harder and you're just wasting time on them. Do all the easy ones, raise your confidence, and then come back and tackle the hard questions, and you have extra time to do it. So that's what I would say. Number 6, don't always use a calculator. So the ACT exam, math exam, was built for you not to use a calculator. So obviously, it doesn't require you to use a calculator for any of those questions. And sometimes it will be way more work to use a calculator than to not. So that's why I would recommend don't use a calculator for every question, just on the questions that it will actually help you. Don't feel like you need to plug in every answer when it's very simple answers. That like adding and subtracting, you don't need a calculator for that. Just do it in your head. Okay. Number 7, annotate the word problems. So the ACT loves to give long problems, especially towards the end. However, a lot of these long problems boiled down to a simple solution. And the way to do it is as you're reading these word problems, underline and or highlight, not highlight, but underline or circle key points in the word problems. And by doing that, you simplify the word problem and you can easily answer it and create your own formula for the word problem. Because at the end of the day, they only try to trick you by making the questions longer or slow you down. Truthfully, they're not that harder than normal other shorter questions. Okay, number 8. Eliminate as many answers as you can before you guess. You might not know what the right answer is, but you can usually tell what the right answer is not. There are 4 ways to eliminate incorrect answers. Look for the odd man out, look for round numbers, uh, look to round up, and pick a guessing letter. So the first one, look for the odd man out. The answer choice that is completely unlike the other. So this is such as a negative number when all the other choices are positive, or the only fraction when all the other answer choices are decimal. These are usually incorrect. If you cross this answer out, then you usually increase your odds of guessing the correct answer by at least 20%. Number 2, look for round numbers. The ACT is designed so that people without calculators can still get a perfect score. So when in doubt, look for numbers that are easier to work with, such as multiples of 5 or 10. Number 3, round up. If you're pressed for time and don't have the time to work out a question completely, round the numbers to those that you could work with in your head. Having an approximate answer will help you eliminate choices that are off base. And number 4, pick a guessing letter. If you're blindly guessing, pick one letter and stick to it for the whole exam. Statistically, you will get 20% of those questions correct. That's a higher chance than if you guess randomly. Number 9, don't recheck all of your answers. In an ideal situation, you would have time to recheck every ACT math problem. However, you don't have time on this test. So what I would say is star the questions that are very hard. Don't recheck any of the answers, but star the questions that are very hard. Do all the easy questions first. And when you come back, do those hard questions and spend more time on the hard questions. Trust your gut. You got those easy ones correct. Don't worry too much about them. If you made a silly mistake on one of them, it's not the end of the world. But by wasting time and spending more time on that silly mistake, you're eliminating time that you have for harder questions and time that you need. So don't worry about one question and move on. And don't recheck your work. So yes, that's the ACT math tips. Now let's move on. So the ACT science tips. Okay, the first tip, you need to know what to expect. The ACT science prep begins with understanding what's on the ACT science test. So the format of the test, it's 40 multiple choice questions and about 7 science passages. The topics of the test include biology, chemistry, physics, and the earth/space sciences such as astronomy, geology, and meteorology. So most of the questions can be answered from the information presented in the passages or figures, but be prepared for 3 to 4 questions that require outside knowledge. You should be able to look up data and trends on this test, make predictions, and synthesize information. Okay, so understand the ACT science passage types. This is number 2. So all of the science passages fall within 3 categories. The types of science passages include charts and graphs with 5 questions per section, and they always come with figures, while containing 1 or more charts, tables, graphs, and illustrations. Then comes experiments with around 6 questions per section, and they usually come with figures, and they describe several experiments, and they include more text than the charts and graph passages do. And the last section is opposing viewpoints, only having 1 passage and 7 questions. They sometimes come with figures, but it always feels more like a passage on the ACT reading test because they ask you to compare, contrast, and synthesize different viewpoints. Number 3, the order of the passages. So the ACT doesn't present the passages in order of difficulty, but on every exam, some are easier than others, while some are truly tough. So scan the passages and tackle the one that looks easiest first. You don't want to spend too much time on the most difficult passages only to run out of time on questions you can more easily answer. Okay, number 4. Decide if you will do questions now, later, or never. So your goal with all the ACT science passages is to find the main point. You will spot the main point faster when those conclusions are presented in figures rather than in text. So the easier the figures are to read, the faster you'll crack the main point. The best passages to do now have the most obvious patterns as well as a few other common characteristics. Look for small graphs, easy to spot trends, and short answers, especially answers with number and relationship words like increase or decrease. So, yes. Number 5, be flexible. Always be prepared to adapt your order based on what you see, both in practice and on a real test. If you choose a passage that looked good and then find yourself struggling, leave it and find another one. Number 6, stumped, guess, and move on. So when you're stumped, your first instinct may be to go back and read the passage or stare at the figure again, waiting for a flash of inspirational genius to suddenly make everything clear. Instead, use process of elimination to get rid of answers that can't be right. Even if you cross off only one answer, guess from what's left and move on. Thank you all so much for your time. That was ACC Science Tips. I think with these 4 tips, you should be feeling prepared and just practice. That's the best. That's the main idea I can give you. Just practice. Go through these tips again before the test, and I think all of you will be fine. Thank you all so much.